Good Sunday morning, Northeast Ohio. President Trump wrapping up a roller coaster week with a stop in Columbus on Friday for a state GOP fundraiser for an outgoing two-term Republican governor like John Kasich. An event like this should serve as sort of a victory lap around the bases. But because of his relationship with President Trump, Kasich was notably absent. When John Kasich won the governor's seat in 2010, he went into office with a go big or go home attitude.
Put on the seatbelt.
Cutting funds in local government and taking on the state's labor unions brought on an immediate and powerful pushback. Kasich said at the time, lesson learned.
When you want to bring big change, you have to prepare people for why it's needed.
By re-election time, he'd win 86 of the state's 88 counties, launching him on a path to the White House, losing his bid to Donald Trump, but winning the state handily over Trump in March of 2016. Trump would go on to win the state and the White House without Kasich's endorsement. 2 years later,
President Trump is now coming into John Kasich's territory and ruining his farewell party.
Allies of the president now control the state GOP hierarchy, and Trump's Ohio campaign share is now number 2 at the RNC, who last week wrote a blistering opinion piece against Kasich.
You cross the president at your peril. We saw that with Mark Sanford, who lost his renomination to be the congressperson from South Carolina. There's some other issues involved in that, but he was critical of President Trump. Those that criticized the president have become the outcasts of the party.
Putting many of those in the party in the middle. Who has the bigger impact on the state right now, the president or the governor?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think that back and forth is, you know, again, it's kind of a distraction. I think we should focus on the policies and the policy differences. And, you know, there are going to be some policy differences between the governor and President Trump, and that's legitimate.
Well, Senator Portman may not have wanted to bite on that question, but the man who wants to join him in the U.S. Senate certainly did. Congressman Jim Renacci telling me Friday, this is now a Trump state. My conversation with Renacci came 6 years after the 2012 Republican National Convention in Tampa, and I mentioned to the congressman that I found myself recently looking through some of the pictures from that convention. One of the pictures that I took that stood out to me was the national debt clock that was up in the rafters of the forum there. What struck me is it was just under 16 trillion, and we're about 21.5 trillion today. It was such a linchpin of conservative Republican politics. What happened?
Well, it still is for me, and it's one of the reasons why I was disgusted with the House, because I've also, you know, the Omni, we got a bill at 8 o'clock at night, and we had to vote for it at 11 o'clock the next morning. Shame on anybody who voted for that, because it was 2,440 pages. You couldn't read it. And Republicans and Democrats both voted for it. It added more to the debt. We have to fix this. If we do nothing and just continue without growth, if we would have stayed in the 1.8% growth that President Obama had, the deficit would have just skyrocketed. At 4% growth, we can start to narrow that down. Now, the problem is it's got to be sustained growth. That's always the problem.
Because in the second quarter, we had 13% exports. Right. People trying to get ahead of the tariffs. If you know gas is going up tomorrow, I'm going to fill up my tank today. Can you sustain it? And plus, I know the CBO also said with the deficit, you know, with the tax plan, it could be 33 trillion in 10 years.
Absolutely, but if you go with the CBO director said, and he was in our budget committee, he said 85% of the problem, because I asked him this. I said, tell me where the debts and deficits are coming from. He said 85% of the problem is demographics. He said we're spending money on areas that we never planned on. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. We never expected all these retirements and not enough people to fill the coffers to pay for this. We have 10,000 people retiring per day since 2010, and we have slow growth. I'm talking about family growth. We don't have population growth like we used to. If we don't get those growth numbers, as a CPA and business guy, I can tell you, and I know people back home don't like to hear this, but you need 3% growth just to keep the government going. You need 4% growth to start to pay down the debt. We're there now. We got to sustain it and keep it going.
Well, sustained growth is a term that applies not only to Washington, but here in Cleveland. And a new project plan for Ohio City looks to do just that. Drive around West 25th in Lorain and your eyes are drawn to the century-old West Side Market. It is the definition of iconic in both form and function. As such, it's easy to look past the shopping center across the street. Market Plaza is a late 80s single-story strip center with in-front parking that could soon be transformed into this, a mixed-use neighborhood within a neighborhood.
We're excited about making something happen here. We sit next to one of the most historic buildings in town, if not the most.
Northeast Ohio native Dan Whalen is heading up the Harbor Bay real estate project that presented their conceptual plans to the City Landmark Commission. The submitted plans to the city show the project would involve 2 buildings, a 10-story residential building that would feature 265 apartments and an 11-story office building with 138,000 square feet of leasable space. Both buildings, separated by Gehring Street, would have covered parking, 560 spots in all, as well as first-floor retail. Plans also show a 31,000 square foot green space along Lorraine Avenue, directly across from the market. Whalen says the plans at this stage are flexible.
Right now it's determining the massing, if the building's the right size, if it approaches the street correctly, and really fits within the context of the neighborhood.
And developers are hoping to be in a position to break ground by late next year. With Democracy 2018, I'm Kasich. Enjoy your Sunday.